Welcome to today's episode of Unthinkable, a podcast about the aftermath of incidents causing catastrophic injury or death, the experts who are called to serve when these accidents occur, and lessons that we can all learn and implement in our own personal lives. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, kylebachus.com. Now here's the host of the Unthinkable podcast, Kyle Bachus.
Well, hello. I am Kyle Bachus. I'm a personal injury lawyer. I have been for 30 years. And after years of helping clients who have been victims of terrible accidents or crimes and helping them through these difficult times, unfortunately, I came face to face with the same thing, tragedy in my own family, where my mom, it's been 4 years ago now, my mom was run over and killed by a concrete mixer truck while walking across the street. And it was in the aftermath of helping my own family through this process. I became very aware of my unique position. Not only have I spent 30 years representing families in this arena, I have been through what my families that I represent have been through. And so that led me to writing the book, Unthinkable. Became a bestseller in the legal space. And then that led to this podcast, which is specifically about really learning more about the aftermath of incidents that cause catastrophic injury from the perspective of all of the people, all of the experts that come into play that help figure out what happened, why it happened, how it happened, and really to help the families, but also to help people understand how to prevent this from happening to their family in the future. And so that's why we have the podcast. And I am so excited today to have Kevin Ryder with us. And Kevin Ryder is, a renowned expert. Kevin Ryder is a human factors expert. That's right, a human factors expert. And he is the owner of a company called Forensic Human Factors, and he's based in Columbus, Ohio. And he spends his time with his team investigating catastrophic car and truck crashes all around the country. I mean, all around the country, and has just an incredible professional reputation as being just an absolute a genius in this area. And so, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, that's an incredible introduction. So now I got to live up to it. So that's interesting enough. But no, I love how you lay it out there, and even the intro, just in terms of what we do and why we do it. You know, you and I come at it from different reasons, different backgrounds, but it's ultimately the same purpose. I spent several years teaching because I wanted to explain the necessity of safety through the country, and ultimately found this workspace where I can actually apply my education, engineering background, experience, and training, and investigating these catastrophic incidents all around the country. It's just engrossing work. It's just a blessing to be able to participate.
So, as a start, some people probably have never even heard of the field of expertise of human factors. Can you tell us what is a human factors expert?
Yeah, you're not wrong. Even when I give professional presentations, I have to be aware of that. So really any audience, maybe half the people understand. Some initially talking to the other half. And right now, that other half, I would say it's what you already know. But human factors can be defined as how, the science of how people interact with other people, products, and environments, and using that information to design safe products and systems. It's simply just how our world, how we expect it to run. A terrible phrase, people say it's common sense. And that's not true. If it were common, we really wouldn't have all these problems. The fact is we understand human nature. We know how it's going to unfold in a novel situation, and we can plan for that if we do it right.
So just briefly, so that people understand your background and what you kind of bring to the table, what sort of education do you have to be a person who can come in and offer to industry or to courtrooms information on human factors?
So let me answer that a slightly different way, because the question I often get sitting around the table, right? They're fascinating conversations, the unfortunate nature of what we do, and I get asked that question. Well, how'd you get into that? And I really don't encourage anyone to just go out to try to become an expert. It turns out that I have this journey of my life that's led me through education, experiences, and training that ultimately attorneys found me, and they saw in me something that would be helpful for their cases. I'm teaching 3 days a week in these particular subjects that relate especially to catastrophic car and truck crashes. So ultimately being able to just apply that into this legal space was fascinating. And it's kind of like solving a new puzzle every week. But ultimately I have 3 industrial engineering degrees, 2 from the University of Tennessee, got my PhD from the University of Michigan, before then teaching at West Virginia University. So ultimately with some degrees behind my name, some teaching in the classroom, raising 5 kids, you learn a lot about life, and it's great that I can use it.
So you're officially Dr. Ryder, and your PhD is in what?
Industrial and operations engineering is technically, but again, it's just another engineering field that really relates to systems and processes and how things should operate.
So let's kind of take your background and what you do and try to apply it a little bit in the real world, right? So you deal with car crashes. What primarily, when you look at a case, and you said attorneys bring you in for your expertise, and I presume that could be an attorney who's been hired by an insurance company, or it could be an attorney who is been hired by a family who's a victim, right?
Absolutely. So we would say I review cases on both sides of the aisle, if you will, whether it's plaintiff or defense, and it just depends on the facts of the case. And of course, I have to turn down a lot of cases that really just the attorneys have a different purpose in their legal strategy, where my expertise doesn't fit. Maybe someone else does, and that's great. But yeah,
when I think,
applying it.
yeah, Kevin, when I think about what you do, that's so fascinating to me is we take a subject like, let's say, distracted driving, and maybe you're asked to come in and weigh in on the difference between what somebody who is distracted how they might behave and why, versus somebody who's acting reasonably, right? Can you tell me about distracted driving? Because to me, if we all know fundamentally, if you ask us, if I asked you, is distracted driving a bad thing? You would say, yeah, that's a bad thing.
Of course it is.
I would say that's a bad thing. If we all know that it's a bad thing, what is it about us humans that causes people to continue to engage in that conduct despite the actual danger?
Yeah, because practically speaking, it's never happened to us. It's really this "it won't happen to me" syndrome, if you will, the Superman complex, where we know it happens, and the data, the research is fascinating. Practically everyone understands that texting while driving is dangerous, and then you get into blind research where the researchers don't know. There's this that's anonymous, and people acknowledge that most people actually do it. So you have, on one hand, everyone knows it's bad and dangerous, and on the other hand, they actually do it anyway. And the difference is, every time you glance at your phone, you do something with your phone or other device, texting or calling, and you're not in a collision, it reinforces this false belief that it's not as dangerous as people say. And then you do it once, you do it 10 times, you do it 100 times. It's ingrained. It's a habit that has never yet caused a tragedy. And it's really just statistics. At some point, there's going to be that boy that chases the ball on the road, and you'll hit him. And it's the perfect storm of events, unfortunately. But the more often we're on that phone, the more we're reinforcing the lie. And the more that we're on the phone, the greater we're increasing those chances that it's going to happen to us.
Well, it's what's fascinating to me is sometimes I'll be talking with a family, and let's say, there's been some sort of very serious crash or collision involving one of their family members, and they'll come to my office and they'll say, I never realized how dangerous driving is. Just the act of driving. And now I'm scared to get on the roadway because I see how dangerous it is. I've heard, and maybe you could weigh in on it, like this kind of psychological background, right? Which is, if we all realized how dangerous it is, like the driving is probably the most dangerous thing we do every day, driving around in 4,000-pound boxes at 50 miles an hour, 5 feet from each other, right?
Mhm.
That if we really understood it, we would all just stay in our rooms in a padded room all day. And so our minds tell us it's not going to be us, right? Kind of like when you hear about a person, if I said, hey, gosh, my friend had a heart attack the other day, and your mind immediately is going, is that a smoker? Are they overweight? Are they not out in shape? Or we're trying to figure out psychologically how it's never going to be us and how that plays a role in human conduct.
I mean, yeah, you've covered it. And additional to the 4,000-pound vehicles, I think the 80,000-pound, commercial trucks, they're basically just tanks. And yeah, I mean, this distraction is ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere. Everyone does it. And also what you're getting at with the original part of what you're saying is driving is far more dangerous than we recognize. And for the most part, we call that an assumption of risk. We do it every day. We understand that. This is, in fact, why defensive driving, even though it's kind of a cliche, it is so essential. There are so many of my cases where two drivers, one strikes the other, and one of the drivers wasn't doing anything wrong. They're life-changing events when they were just driving down the road and someone blows a stop sign at 60, 70 miles per hour. And too many of those to recount, unfortunately, for today. But the reality is, we need to be looking as experienced drivers. We understand the driving environment. We know where we're likely or more likely to encounter something. We know to look for pedestrians at crosswalks and at intersections. We know where cars might enter the roadway. So we have to be focusing on the places where things might happen and not just be reactive to what's occurring, especially and definitely not getting lost in terms of, everything's fine, so I don't need to pay as close attention. That's a dangerous one as well.
So when you're asked to come in on cases, have you developed like Dr. Ryder's own kind of list or thoughts about, what are some of the most common but unexpected dangerous situations while driving that you could help the audience here, like say, man, guys, I do this for a living. Let me tell you how you can help make your life safer if you just think about these kind of most common but unexpected circumstances.
Yeah, I think if there was actually, so two come to mind. I think they are the largest categories of things that we know and we understand, but they're overrepresented in my casework. So one is related to, it's called looming, and a looming threshold. I'll explain that in a second. And the other one we call gap acceptance. And just to be as brief as I can, then you can tell me to go longer if you'd like. But
sure.
Looming is simply you're driving down the road and there's a car out in front of you at some distance. It looms out in front of you. Well, your ability to know how fast it's going is limited basically by how fast it's growing or shrinking in your field of view. So if that car out in front of you is getting smaller, it's going away from you. It's getting bigger, then you're approaching it. Well, the problem is we're really not paying attention to it, because as we're driving, we kind of have two expectations of that car in front of us. One, that it's going in the same direction, and two, it's going at about the speed limit. And if either of those aren't correct, we need something else to alert us to it. And that's what we call this looming threshold, because it's not going to grab our attention. We're not going to realize that we're approaching this, say, stopped or slow moving vehicle on a roadway. Maybe it's broken down until it's rapidly growing in our field of view. And we have this like, oh crap moment, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's just too late. And so this issue of understanding really clearly that vehicle out in front of us and what it's doing, it's why we have so many rear end collisions, let alone distraction. But even non-distracted people that are just driving, even looking forward. I have videos I could pull up on the screen where it's got an internal camera. It shows the driver looking straight ahead. And it also has a forward-facing camera. You can see the hazard lights of the broken down vehicle. And the driver's just looking straight ahead. And then, oh no, and right through the back of it. And so, again, so common, daytime and nighttime for different reasons. And to shift real quick, this gap acceptance, this is what happens. You're about to turn across a roadway or even enter into one. And you're deciding if there's enough of a gap between traffic. And you're gonna maybe
like you're taking a left-hand turn, you're at an intersection, you're waiting there, you got the green light, but not the green arrow, and you got to make your left-hand turn, and you want to see, and the gap you're talking about is that vehicle is approaching. Do I have time to make that turn?
That's exactly right. And it gets applied in different ways, but it's a great example, maybe most common, really. And of course, you're pretty experienced with all this. So so that you wait for that first car to come past you, and then you're deciding, is there enough time for me to make this turn before the second one gets there? So the problem is we are really bad at what we call distance estimation, or how long is it going to take that car to get to us? And so we make that determination, we decide it's safe, and then we start making that turn, and we really don't go back and verify if that car is still at a distance that we think it should be. So once that oncoming car gets to about twice the speed limit, we're going to look at that turn. We're going to see how far away it is. It's not a calculation, but this internal understanding, we know at a speed limit, we have plenty of time. So we make that turn, except it gets to us in half the time. And that's where we get these broadside collisions because they're going too fast to stop. The turning driver could have recognized that it was speeding, but it's very difficult. And because it's unexpected, we really don't pay that kind of attention. So understanding very clearly those oncoming cars, at least the one that's out in front of you in the same lane, the one that's approaching you, that's going to have a potential conflict of your path. Those are definitely this, as I said before, this overrepresented. There's so many of them.
So let's talk about solving the looming problem, right?
Sure.
Knowing what you know, right? And you're a human as well, obviously, but knowing what you know, how can somebody watching or listening to this take control to lessen in their world the danger that you have described as something you see over and over again, this looming problem?
Well, I mean, the problem is that people don't know it exists. And so with so many things, it starts with education. Most of us wear seatbelts nowadays. Decades past, that was comical. You were made fun of when you were younger if you were wearing a seatbelt. And now we know it's stupid if you don't, right? So there's just this long period, unfortunately too long, where there's education, there's experience, people start understanding, they start choosing to do it. And sometimes we have to have regulations to help that along. But ultimately to understand that car in front of you may not be doing what you think. So if you're looking at it and it's stopped or slow moving, you have plenty of time to avoid it. It's when you don't recognize the possibility that you end up stuck with this looming issue. And by the time it grabs your attention, we start talking about the word conspicuity. And I hope we'll get into that more.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, so something's conspicuous, it grabs your attention. If you haven't yet realized that vehicle is stopped or slow moving, by the time it grabs your attention, in many cases, it's too late to avoid it. So that's where it really just comes back to being understanding of what that lead vehicle is doing. And I'll just tie in real quick. The different amount of information that's communicated to you as a driver with that lead vehicle. If its brake lights are on, it's stopped or it's slowing. That's the nature of how it works. If its hazard lights are on, it probably is having a problem, but you don't know how fast it's going. And then we have vehicles on the side of the road, especially commercial vehicles, and maybe they got their hazard lights on, maybe there's still their brake lights. You still don't have that level of information. They may have an issue, they may be slowing, they may be stopped. We go all the way to the Federal Motor Carrier has requirements to put out these warning triangles. And those provide the most amount of information. That commercial driver, when they pull over, they have to put those out as soon as possible and at least within 10 minutes. And basically, as you're driving on the road, you see those triangles, that vehicle is stopped. It's having an issue. It's a potential hazard. Those triangles are unique information that comes from them, because everything else, the car could still be moving. It could still be doing the speed limit with flashers on. So it's understanding what these different things mean, and then kind of preparing as a driver to be able to respond once you figure out the problem. But seeing
And
those things at a distance is the key.
and this growing size, right? Yeah, I think you described, which we all know, right? You as you're driving, if that vehicle is getting bigger faster than you might expect it, you need to be prepared to act, right?
Yep.
Because it might be going 5 miles an hour and you're driving 50 miles an hour, that distance is going to close very quickly.
Very quickly, in fact. And again, if you're on a lane, maybe there's a car next to you, you may not have an out, even if you wanted to steer. If you do steer, maybe you're hitting another car. Most people, without knowledge of what's going around, will just slam on their brakes. Pros and cons with that, but still usually not enough time or distance.
Well, and then that presents another issue. Let's say instead of the car that's behind you, you're the front vehicle, and you do have that hazard light on, or you do have something going on. I mean, what can you do in that scenario to avoid being the victim of a looming process?
I wish that was an easier question to answer, but we'll be real clear here. You got to get off the road if you can. One of the most dangerous things you can do is to stay in the travel lane at a slow speed. You are violating the expectations of every driver that's going to come behind you. And the first 9 or 99 may miss you. One's going to hit you. And whether they're distracted or not, if you want to play that game, that's something. But ultimately, you got to get off the road. Unfortunately, I've had problems in cases where they stayed in the car. They thought that was safer, and the truck went right through the car. In other cases, they got out of the car and the truck swerved to miss the car and hit the pedestrian. So
it's really scary because a lot of times there's no safe out, and you're relying upon the vehicle behind you to see that's your hazards on. We're told like that's what hazard lights are for, right? I'm going to get off, but it's going to take me some time. You need to see me, but that can be a real a falsehood, right?
Yes.
What you see and what I see is, boy, in that scenario, get off as reasonably safely and as quickly as you can.
Truly, don't try to drive further. Don't try to get home. For the most part, thankfully, most people have cell phones. That's not universally true, of course, but call somebody, get someone else to get you to pick you up. Call the police if you can. Fortunately, flashing blue lights are pretty effective to affect driver behavior. So
what is it about this? And is it true? I remember being told in school when I was going through driver's training that there's something that's attractive about a stopped vehicle on the side of the roadway, especially at night, that causes other drivers to drive into the back of you. Is that true?
All right. So that's a great question. So it's usually called like the moth to the flame phenomenon. So scientifically, it's not proven to be true, but there are reasons why it occurs. So if the lights are on the side, no, people are not drawn to it. It doesn't have that effect, except now that I'm going to speak out the other side of my mouth, especially at night and you're driving down the road, especially in the distance, you can't see the lane lines that are quarter mile ahead of you. You're in fact following the tail lights in front of you. And so you're not getting pulled to the side. It's a stop vehicle. They're flashing blue lights. I'm just steering into the light. What it really is you're actually just not paying attention. You're so focused on following the tail lights in front of you that if those tail lights happen to be on the shoulder and you're not really paying attention, you'll end up in the back of them. It really is tying back into the looming effect. You're not really realizing what's going on. It is a strange phenomenon. It does happen, but for mainly different reasons than most people argue.
Okay. And this gap, so how do you solve the other danger that you see if you want to be preventative and you want to maybe tell your new 16-year-old driver, if you have one in your household, right? Here's how you should best handle the gap issue from an expert like yourself that sees this over and over again. What do you do?
Well, it is far more easy than you realize. The answer is to look twice. It really just comes back to it. You might say trust but verify. right? It's another way.
Okay.
Like you establish that the car is far enough away, and so you make a decision. If you just go back and look one more time after that, so you want to make that left turn, you're far enough away, you look left, I can make the turn, look back to the right again to see if that car is still far enough away. The reality is if you look at it and you try to evaluate it, you can tell that it's coming at you pretty quickly. The problem is it's unexpected. You don't really think. So this whole look twice, save a life, usually with motorcycles, same concept. If we would just look one more time to verify, in most cases, there'd be enough time to basically stop the turn, avoid the conflict, and yeah, save your own life.
Well, and even when you're that driver heading straight through, and you see a vehicle up and you're trying to gauge, are they going to go or not go? And I've heard people say that they'll see a vehicle that's up there and they'll speed up a little bit to make sure that the vehicle knows that they're not stopping. Have you heard of that?
I mean, yes and no, anecdotally, but I'm not aware of that's actually a thing. But we know it is. You get that yellow light. The sad joke I grew up with was, red stop, green go, yellow go faster.
Right.
It's a terrible issue, especially when you bring it into context of that. You're driving, you're approaching the green light that turns yellow, and there's someone waiting to turn. The problem, sometimes they call it like a yellow ball trap. It means it's something different. Same idea, though. You get the yellow light. That person waiting to turn left from the other side, they get the same yellow light on their side, and they assume you're going to stop. And so as soon as it turns yellow, they think they're free to go. And in most states, you can enter the intersection on a green and complete it after it turns yellow or red. And those states have a real problem with kind of legally creating these conditions.
Because we all are counting on each other. And if you're at the light and you're in a position where you've got to clear the intersection before the next light turns green, then there is that time where you're expecting that the approaching vehicle, if they have the opportunity, that they're going to stop. Now you got to kind of make sure of that, right? But your expectation is, you're supposed to stop.
Right. I mean, if I recall my driver training well enough, I believe it was yellow basically means stop if you can safely. And ultimately, we actually call it the dilemma zone. That's your highway design issue of if you're far enough back and it turns yellow, that's the one end of what we call the dilemma zone. Most people will stop. And if you're at the other end of the dilemma zone, you're much closer to the intersection. Most of those people will continue through. And then in that zone, it's just a decision. And in fact, depending where you are in that dilemma zone, you may or may not be able to know whether or not you'll make it before it turns red. And so it's actually very difficult. Those people can't know if they're going to make it through on the yellow or not. And again, you tie that back to what is our responsibility. When we're the turning driver, we got to make sure they stop. We can't assume anything from other drivers, especially go back to the beginning of this podcast. They're probably distracted.
Yeah.
So, what are you actually, you're assuming the best out of everyone. And societally, we know that's actually just not true.
Yeah. And if you are the vehicle that is approaching and you should stop and you don't stop, you're doing that knowing that if there's a car there in that left lane, that car at some point is going to turn left, and you're just hoping that they're going to recognize you're not stopping. That's a pretty...
Well, and it's worse too, because what we're talking about ultimately are personal injuries. We want to avoid them. As much as we love our job, I would also love to not be able to do it, because no one's in a car crash.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I would love if my field went away.
Right.
So we take it all the way to the end, and there's a lawsuit. This is going to go into the hands of a jury where both drivers made legal actions, legal, not illegal. They made legal decisions that caused a crash that killed one or more people, because that person is allowed to enter the intersection and continue through once they believe they can. And the other driver's approaching it, turns yellow, and they have a decision to go through or not. And so they can both legally be in the same spot in that, where those two paths would meet. And a jury's got to decide who's more at fault. Fortunately, I get involved in cases like this, and my work's objective. You and I have different responsibilities. I fully respect yours. Mine is here's the research, here's the science, here's the data, and here's to basically say that that driver was this far away from the intersection when it turned yellow, and some percentage of drivers by science would stop, and they didn't. So that'd be one way that could go. And the other side, could have just made the left turn. They had enough time or they didn't. And ultimately, depending on how the facts of the case go, someone like me or a reconstructionist and a couple other fields that be able to evaluate this, like a traffic engineer, it's our job to actually get in there and explain to the jury why it occurred. Because no law was broke. No one did anything wrong. They made reasonable decisions and someone died. It's a terrible part of our this.
Yeah, but it seems to me that the lesson to be learned from what you're talking about here is, look, well, first of all, how long is the average traffic light sequence overall? A couple of minutes? I mean, what?
No, it can be much shorter, really, because that's one question, because some could be green for a very long time, just the nature of the roadways. But at least yellow lights tend to be 3 to 4 seconds long, depending on the speed limit of the roadway. And so you've got the yellow signal. And then many intersections have they call it an all red or a clearance red for 2 seconds. And so those are traffic engineering ways to try to prevent these intersection crashes.
Right, but if you're the driver going straight, right, and
Yeah.
I'm making a decision, and you say there's this dilemma zone, right, where if I'm outside, if I'm far enough away, I know, man, I'm going to stop, right?
Yeah.
If I'm really close, I'm going to make it through at the early part of that yellow, and like you described, scientifically, most people are going to go. If I'm in that dilemma zone and I want to make a decision, I guess what I'm saying is the lesson I'm hearing is, why aren't I always in my life moving forward just going to make a decision in that dilemma zone to stop? Why aren't I? I mean, maybe somebody could rear end me. I need to look in my rear view mirror to make sure the person behind me is going to make the same decision. But why not just make the decision? How delayed am I going to be? 2 minutes, 3 minutes later, or we could be there. I could not ever make it home, right?
Yeah, obviously, when you get down to the math is easy, right? We should be stopping every single time. We should be trying to stop and then realize there's not enough time when we keep going through.
Okay.
But absolutely, I think one takeaway would be is that we should try to stop at every yellow light.
And then if I'm making my left turn on a yellow light and I'm in the intersection and I'm in that fearful period where I don't want to obstruct when the light turns red, what I'm hearing is what I should be doing is I'm going to look once to verify, and then I'm going to look again to make a second look at what's the speed of the closest oncoming vehicle to make sure that they're going to stop.
Yep.
Or that I have room if there's a gap.
You got it. And when we're talking about intersection turns like that oncoming car is close enough for us to know. There are other situations it's so fast, it's so far, it's harder to tell. But that one, yes. It's simply just ensuring that the car is going to stop. Because practically what happens is, as you're waiting to turn left, as soon as it turns yellow, you stop. You don't even think about that oncoming car. It's yellow, they're going to stop. I start turning. There really isn't a cognitive process that's going on there. So the simple thing is just double check. Just make sure it's going to stop and then go, and it's avoided. You'd sure rather wait there too long and obstruct the cross traffic that's starting from 0 miles per hour. They may be annoyed they have to wait for 6 seconds, right? But the alternative, like you said, is you're not going to get home, or they're not going to get home. Someone is without a parent, a kid, a sibling, a friend. And I wish we would have that kind of awareness. And then the reality is we're selfish. Selfish for our time. We don't want to be late. There's concepts of road rage. It's really just a terrible reflection of our heart when we let that get to it. Coming out in those areas.
Well, that's helpful. Tell me about conspicuity and what that is. That's a big word. I know it interfaces with a lot of what we've been talking about here, but what is that and why is that so important?
Yeah, so conspicuity, as I kind of write in my reports and testimony, gets referred to as attention-grabbing characteristics. So it's something it's going to grab your attention. It's if you're not otherwise paying attention, it's the flashing light you turn to look at, or the sound that makes you jump. That's a conspicuity in a different way. But we're really talking about visibility and conspicuity. And so the example I would give you that I see a lot are pedestrians trying to cross the road at night. There's a great journal article from years ago, basically that pedestrians overestimate their visibility. When we're out there at night, our eyes are adjusted to the light. We can see pretty well when we're walking around. And so we have this belief that approaching drivers can see us just as well. And so we don't really think about the fact that, as we're a pedestrian, we look to see if there's a car. We're looking in one spot. There's a car. That driver is looking everywhere, scanning ahead, their mirrors, their side, anything else they may be doing with a phone or otherwise, for that matter. But the pedestrians can see the cars. In many cases, the drivers can't see the pedestrians, and we're really talking about conspicuity. What does it take for a driver to see something, to reliably detect, identify, and avoid? And so we know such things as, construction workers have, we call them retro-reflective vests. I actually have a bright one, yellow one back there. So because we know that people can see them, the light bounces back, they're really bright colors, the headlights reflect off of them. But yet I still have these cases where I've got some dark clothed pedestrian crossing a roadway where there's no street lights, and they believe that the driver's going to see them. So they're inconspicuous. There's nothing about them that's going to grab your attention. So the pedestrian's one example, and I'll just dovetail to the other that's common for me, and that's the red and white tape you'll see on commercial vehicles.
Yes.
Retro-reflective tape or conspicuity tape or sheeting, different terms of art, if you will.
Is this the tape? I'll see it on the bottom of a trailer, of a semi-tractor trailer combination.
Yeah, you hope to see them. It's been required for 30 years now. And so, there's very specific locations that they need to be. And there's also minimum maintenance requirements for how much the retroreflective properties, that they're still reflecting light. And unfortunately, commercial carriers, trucking companies, they're really bad at maintaining the tape. And when you look at it, you see the red and white is probably just fine. And you pull out a measuring device, and you realize that it's basically just cardboard. It's cardstock. It doesn't reflect any light. It's terrible at night. So yes, that's the key thing. Sided trailers, when they're crossing the road, if that is not bright, shining, and then the angle of the vehicles, that's the work I have to get into as an engineer. The efficacy, the usefulness, the effectiveness of that tape, dramatically affected by the angle of the trailer. So if it's perpendicular to the road, you can see it most of the time if it's in good shape. When it's angled, the reflective properties go down quickly, and you can't see it at all.
When you go back to that pedestrian example, I mean, I feel like I see it with bicycles. In Denver, where I live, there's a lot of bicyclists on the roads, and especially as it gets to be darker, and you'll see people they are riding their bikes as if they are glow in the dark, and they're not glow in the dark.
You're not wrong.
They seem to be so confident. And I think to myself, maybe it's because of the work that I do. They're like, my God, do you know how much you're taking your life into your hands when you are riding a bicycle at 15 miles an hour as it's getting to be dusk through downtown traffic, and you're just assuming that everybody's going to take care of you? And so what do you do? What's the answer on the pedestrian side? I doubt people are all going to go out and buy clothes the color of that vest behind you when they're walking around. Maybe a bicyclist should, but what's the answer to the conspicuity issue?
Well, so let's go back to your first rhetorical, which we know is true. People are not going to go out and buy vests like that. But why not? Why wouldn't you? I mean, it's such a reliance on other people making the right decision, and everything of life tells us that people make poor decisions all the time. I think it's knowing that you are in the place you're supposed to be. You're traveling in a location you're supposed to be, and that you're aware of what might happen. Whether you're a bicyclist, a pedestrian, a driver, those are the key tenets to ensure your safety. Bike lanes are fantastic, but if you believe you're safe and so you're not going to look for cars, you're in trouble. If pedestrian, it's a growing phenomenon of distracted walking, distracted pedestrians, looking down at their phones.
I saw one this morning, right? Yeah. Walking across the street in a crosswalk with a vehicle who's going to make a right-hand turn, and the pedestrian acts like I have the right of way, and therefore, I'm not going to get hurt. But you know what? If that car hits the pedestrian, who's going to win, right? And
yeah, no doubt. And I had a case not far away from you. That was an unfortunate student that pushed the crosswalk button and never stopped walking. Just walked around in traffic, and unfortunately, the bus driver wasn't doing his job either. So, all interesting casework when it gets down to those details.
So, one last thing, and I know we're getting to the end here. We probably need to wrap up, but just something that I think I know the answer to, but I'm not sure. If I'm out as a pedestrian and I'm walking, am I walking against traffic or am I walking with traffic, and why? And the same for a bicycle.
Yeah, so the why is actually the key part, because no one likes rules. No one wants to be told what to do, but to understand the whys, it's like raising kids. You can give them rules. When they get old enough where they understand the rules, that's really what you're after. So when you're walking down the road, do you want to see what might happen to you, or just trust that you're safe? So you walk on the side of traffic where cars are coming at you, because if it leaves the lane, you can see it and you can jump out of the way. If you're walking on the side of the road with traffic and that car leaves the lane behind you, you may not know until you're hit.
Yeah.
You in fact may never know, is the reality of that one. So bicycles has been a little different. Bicycles, we're actually talking about that's the change in velocity, delta V. So if you're traveling on a bicycle, and let's just say you're traveling at 15 miles per hour on a bike. Well, if you're hit from behind from a car doing 45, you're effectively getting hit at 30 miles per hour. If you're going the other way, you're getting hit effectively at a 60 mile per hour collision. Again, the actual biomechanics are a little different. The simple math is a little less practical when you get into it. But that's ultimately the issue, is to be going at a speed and hit from behind, the increase in your body's speed is less. And you're more likely to survive in many of those situations, or less injuries, than if you're traveling into that oncoming object. Not only are you not slowing down, you're immediately going the other direction, right? So it's
fascinating. Let me and just before we go, and I know we really are running out of time, but why is it that it seems to me, especially in, I'd say, the last 10 or 15 years of my career, we see a lot more use of human factors experts. What is it about human factors experts in the critical role that they can play in personal injury cases? Why do I and why should others consider human factors experts in trying to determine what happened in a car crash?
Well, I mean, at a minimum, and I like to say, there is a human factor in every case. And then I have to explain that. It doesn't mean that every case needs a human factors expert to opine, but when there's details that need to be, or jury needs to understand why something occurred, that's when you would call someone like me, someone with a background that's similar to mine, because in a car crash, you'll have lots of experts, but you might have two specifically. You might have a crash reconstructionist and then a human factors expert. So the reconstructionist is generally going to tell you how it occurred. The human factors expert is going to explain why it occurred. Because the jury ultimately when they're trying to figure out who's more at fault, what they're really trying to figure out is, why did this happen, and what should someone have done differently? Well, both of those questions are answered in human factors, not in crash reconstruction, not in the medical experts. Sometimes it goes all the way back to corporate policies that I have to address as well. But that's really the key, is to explain the whys that it occurs, so a jury can understand what actually happens, the kind of all the facets, so they can make a more knowledgeable decision when it comes down to that part of their job.
And let me add to that from my perspective, in the families that I deal with, when somebody comes in and a loved one has been killed, uh, you know, one of the first things that they ask me is, can you help figure out why this happened? Right? Can you help figure out
Right.
why did we lose my mother or a brother? And really, I think some people might be surprised by this, but when people come to me, it's not, the first thing isn't where's the financial accountability. It's really to get the answers of the how and the why, because it's so shocking that it's happened, and they
Yep.
want to understand why, and then they want to know, how can we make sure no other family faces the same thing?
Absolutely.
And so I tend to utilize human factors experts in the first instance to try to get the answers for the family, and then really in the second instance to make sure that we're able to go in and demonstrate um, in a court of law just what you described. So it's really fascinating, and I think that thank you so much for the insight, because really my goal is safety. Certainly, this is what I do for a living. Unfortunately, cases are going to continue to happen, and I'm going to continue to work those cases, and I'm happy to do it. But in honor of my mother and in honor of all of the families that I've helped and that you've seen over the years, I'm sure, safety, and what you have an incredible insight, Dr. Ryder, into safety from probably the worst perspective, meaning that you're brought in after unsafe things has happened. But I just want to thank you so much for being here. Appreciate very much your time, and I know that the audience is going to have really enjoyed learning from you today.
I sure appreciate the opportunity. It's clear you and I both love our jobs, and yeah, the more we can educate and inform and get out in front of these issues, the better. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And again, this is Kevin Ryder, Dr. Kevin Ryder, and he's with Forensic Human Factors, and they're out of Columbus, Ohio, but do work all over the country. And you will not find a better group or team than Dr. Ryder has put together. So thank you again, Dr. Ryder. Again, I'm Kyle Bachus. Thank you very much for listening today. I hope you learned something about how to navigate your own life and to help prevent the unthinkable from happening to you. Thank you so much.
You've been tuning into the Unthinkable podcast with your host, Kyle Bachus. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, kylebachus.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.